Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Townsend. I'm an e-learning evangelist with eLearning Brothers. Today we're going to be talking about adaptive storyboarding tools with Misty Harding, an instructional designer manager with eLearning Brothers, with us today. So thank you for joining us, Misty. We're excited to hear what you've got to say. During the webinar, if you guys have questions or comments, please use the questions panel. We'll try to get to as many of those comments and questions as we can. If we can't get to your question, I'll see if we can't get that question answered off to the side of the webinar. Just so you know, one of the things we like to do after the webinar is try to follow up as soon as possible. Sometimes it's just to get feedback. Most of the time we'd like to touch base and find out if anybody needs one-on-one clarification about the webinar topic, things like that. So do be watching for an email after the webinar that will have a copy, a recording, as well as some links to useful stuff. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you, Misty.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it. Well, hey, thanks so much for joining us today. We're talking about adaptive storyboarding tools, and I'll give you a little preview of what we're talking about. I put this together because I feel like it is so hard in the e-learning industry to see any examples of storyboarding and how to do it. Furthermore, a lot of the examples that you could find if you just went on to Google, oftentimes are 3-column storyboards, which aren't as effective for many purposes, and may not always match what you're looking for in your project. And so what I wanted to share was 4 tools that I have used over the course of my career to help, and we say adaptive because, first of all, they're very flexible, but also you can pick and choose and mix and match between these 4 depending upon what might fit best for your project. So we're going to look at each of those today. I'm going to show you examples of those, and then we also have a few handouts to help along the way. The reason, though, that I feel like this is such an important topic is because e-learning is fun. And for anyone who has gotten involved in learning, maybe you were tasked with putting something online. Most of us didn't receive any training. Most of us were just told, you need to figure this out, and you need to figure out how to put it online. And that was definitely my case. And so in the early 2000s, I was researching e-learning tools and trying to figure out how to do this because the organization thought it was a good idea, and really fell in love with the design and development of something like this. And it was a really fun time. It's kind of like when you meet and fall in love with a person. Things are fun, like things are going well, and you're euphoric, and you're creating things and thinking everything's awesome. And so I just wanted to start with a brief story that's about me, but I feel like it's really about all of us who have been through that experience of creating and learning. I was tasked with putting together compliance training for the organization. And I think I was given 2 or 2.5 weeks to build it out in e-learning. And I wanted to do something really fun and creative. And so I came up, I think this course was about security and data privacy. And to be compliant, to continue to take credit cards, the company had to have this out by a certain time. So they handed me this big fat policy and said, we need you to get this online really quickly. And I thought, well, this is kind of boring. What can I do to jazz it up? And so I came up with this idea that we would do a carnival. And there were tons of barriers to this, you guys, tons of problems. So I'm like, what if, rather than just have this boring course, they went through a carnival, and the main menu could be this map, and they could travel around to each of these activities and play games to earn tickets that they could then cash in to go to this big final event, which was the fireworks show. And then in each of the games, they would explore the policy by playing the game and learn more about it, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this will be really cool. Well, I didn't have any graphics. This is back before companies like eLearning Brothers were providing great assets for people to use, and I had nothing. I had no image libraries. I had nothing. So I had to draw the graphics for this with a Sharpie, scan them in, and color them in paint to even make this happen. So I did the design, I did all my little lame Sharpie drawings. I'll show you some of them here. Please don't feel like this reflects poorly on eLearning Brothers. This is not one of their products. This was the challenge where they could challenge the dragon to test out of the course, because this is something they had to take every year. And so the little fireballs up there show, you know, if you failed, you got a fireball, and if you got 3 fireballs, you totally failed and had to play. You had to go do all of the Carnival games. And the Carnival games were that we had like a balloon pop where a scenario would come up, and you had to decide if it was personally identifiable information or not, and then you would throw the dart, and if you were right, it would pop the balloon, but if you were wrong, it would miss, and you'd have to keep playing until you popped 10 balloons. And then there was a bumper cars game where you could pick a car and challenge it, and if you were right, you gave a hit, but if you were wrong, you took a hit, and if you took too many hits, you'd have to play again. And you guys can see how lame these graphics are, and you can totally tell they were drawn with a Sharpie. Anyway, and then this was, you had a squirt gun in this game. And so you would aim at a duck, and you'd have to answer a question. And if you were right, the duck would fall safely into the water. But if you were wrong, you'd shoot a piece of trash into the water and pollute it, and then you'd have to start over. So anyway, I thought this was awesome. And what I'm highlighting, at the time I thought that this was very progressive for 2003 or 4 or whenever I did this. It felt progressive to me, and I got it all done. I was super proud of it, and I was having that moment, right? The moment that we all have where we think, this is super cool. What I've done is cool. This is so fun. I'm so excited to show it to people. Eureka, I've emerged from my mad scientist lab, and I have something awesome to show. And the executive stakeholders saw it and didn't agree that it was awesome. and felt like it was juvenile and corny and all of this stuff. But unfortunately, we didn't have time to do anything else at that point, so it got released. This was in a call center environment, so the audience was, you know, probably like between 18 and 23, and they loved it. I got lots of letters about it. I got lots of like, hey, we love this, thank you so much, this was so fun. I completed the whole, this is the first time I've completed the whole thing. We had very little effort trying to get everybody through that year, so it actually was a success, but my stakeholders weren't happy. And in fact, had we not been almost out of time, they probably wouldn't have let it go through. They would have made me redesign it. So I say that this is a story about me, but really it's a story about all of us, because so often we have these moments where it's eureka, I've done it, this is amazing, and then someone takes a look at it and they don't feel the same way. And especially if that's your stakeholder, that can be a problem. And the more creative that you try to be, the more risk you're taking. So I decided that they could test out and made the Dragon Challenge. I didn't run that by anybody. You know, I decided that it was okay to theme it and have them learn through playing games. I didn't ask anybody. And so this was another in a series of really hard lessons that I've learned over the years. This was another one. And so what I've learned is e-learning can be fun, and you can do a lot of cool things with it, but you have to bring your stakeholders along with you. And so the 4 tools that we're going to talk about today are tools that help you do that, so that you all arrive at an agreed upon destination and everybody's feeling good about what happened. So storyboarding is critical for these main different purposes are some of the ones that we're going to talk about today, but illustration of your concept. It is really hard for stakeholders and others to catch the vision of what you're going to be creating, so storyboarding helps a lot in that arena. Communication, these tools can be used as communication with your stakeholders, with your subject matter experts, and also with team members. So if you work in a team where you're collaborating to create a project, some of these tools can work really well for splitting out the work and making sure that you're on the same page. We're going to talk a lot about documentation. One of the problems I noticed early on as I got into e-learning was I would have great ideas, but because I wasn't documenting them, then you get interrupted, or you get back to something after a few days and you're thinking, gosh, what was I going to do here? How was I going to cover this? The stuff that we'll talk about today really saves your bacon, even if you don't ever show it to anybody else. But it helps you stay on track. It also helps to define the scope of the work and make sure that everyone's agreed upon what that is and what it's not, that everyone's okay with the timeline. It helps you gain commitment from your stakeholder, and then it also helps you to express and receive approval for success metrics. So what's going to make this successful, or what markers of success are you looking for? It also allows you to pre-validate what the project constraints are, agree upon those, and then sometimes you have to use those in conversation to let people know, hey, this is why we are or not doing certain things. And also get some pre-validation of your ideas. So if you want to do a fun carnival, you should probably ask somebody first. And then ultimately, they're great sign-off tools as well. I do want to just briefly talk about why we are not talking about the 3-column storyboard today. This is one of the most common ones that you'll see people use, and I'm not saying it doesn't have value, but there are a couple downsides to using this format that I want to highlight. One is it's very hard to picture what the end product is going to be when you're looking at 3-column. The other is it doesn't encourage the designer to be creative. When you're trying to fill out a 3-column storyboard, you're very focused on script. And so for the most part, I view this as a scripting tool where you can make some notes about, oh yeah, we should have an image of this here. Oh yeah, we should probably pull in that graph. But for the most part, you're very focused on scripting. And so it limits the designer. And the third weakness that I feel like it has is in the review and the sign-off. So if you pass this to a stakeholder or subject matter expert, you're definitely going to get a lot of wordsmithing type feedback, but it doesn't, because it's weaker at presenting your concept, you're going to have a hard time truly painting a picture to your end stakeholder about what you're building and really getting any feedback on that. And so at best, this is usually a script, and it doesn't help you to design creatively. And so I don't use this format for that reason. I'm not saying it doesn't have value or it doesn't have a place, but those are some of the main weaknesses that I'm trying to problem solve for with these other things that we're going to talk about today. And I think as I show you examples, that'll become more evident. So what we're talking about today are 4 tools. And what I've done is created a matrix that tries to help give you an idea of what they're good for, and then what they're kind of good for, and what they're not good for. Because, as I talked about at the start, you're going to need to adapt. You may need to adapt the format of each of these tools to work in your organization or for your project, or you may need to adapt the strategy that you're using. So smart outlines maybe are not good for every project. A serious storyboard is definitely not good for every project. So you kind of have to go case by case and decide which one's going to serve you best. And this matrix helps you to do that. So we're talking about smart outlines or executive summaries. That's kind of my outward-facing name for that format, and blueprints, which are usually done in a Word format. We're also going to be talking about wireframes and serious storyboards, which are done in a PowerPoint format, generally speaking. So I'm going to show you an example of each one of these, and then also talk a little bit about what it's good for. This is an example, and we'll go through a more detailed one in just a second, but this is just a quick shot of what a smart outline looks like, or an executive summary. The use case for this would be you sit down. So for example, with my Carnival, when they pulled me in and said, hey, we need this training, and here's what we need from it, and here's the policy, and you're kind of taking down your notes, and they're telling you what you want. An executive summary is something that you would kick back to them afterwards that captures what your understanding of the project is. A lot of times what you'll see is maybe a follow-up to that meeting would be that you would send the stakeholders or the SMEs a quick outline of what you intend to cover in the training. And so that's why I call this a smart outline, because we go further than just saying this is the content we're going to cover. We're identifying constraints, we're identifying key messages, we're identifying the do's and don'ts, we're clearly calling out who has approval over which part of the project, so that we're checking in with the right people. And I'll show you in a minute everything that this encompasses, and you can modify this for your own purposes in your own organization. But that's the high level of what a smart outline or executive summary is. They're great for documenting, even if you don't show this to anybody, they're great to document for yourself to keep you on track. Because as you start to go into your mad scientist lab and design, you can kind of lose track of what the main messages were, what was important. You'll start to add things that aren't as important, and you may miss some of the main messages. So I used to do this just for myself, even if I didn't show it to people. It's also great to get a stakeholder sign off on the scope, because you'll include things like, this is how long it should be, this is when it's going to be done, this is what it's going to include and what it's not. So it's helpful for that. It can be okay to get stakeholder sign off on the design. Obviously, they're not going to know slide by slide what you're doing, but high-level concepts like, will it be scenario-based? Will we play games? Will there be a theme? Are we going to tell a story? Are things that you can describe in this and then at least get their reaction to. And it's also good for communicating the content and structure, because it will contain an outline of what you intend to cover in the course and the basic flow. And so it's good for stakeholders and SMEs to see. So that's what it's good for. We can also go one step further, or in addition to your smart outline, you can also create a blueprint. This is what a blueprint looks like. Blueprints are probably one of the most versatile formats. You could do this in a million different ways. And when we get to the blueprint section, I'll show you several examples of ways you could do it. This one's done in a Word doc. And what you can see is we're thinking through each part of the course piece by piece. So what's my goal? And what approach or method am I going to use to achieve it? What are the key messages of this slide or this part of the course? And maybe even some potential narration that I might include, and a really brief visual of how I intend to approach it. The main point behind a blueprint and what sets it apart from an outline is that I'm not just talking about the content that I'm going to cover, I'm talking about how I'm going to approach it, what type of experience the learner's going to have. I'm defining that up front, and that allows somebody, and this is without me going fully into a storyboard, but this allows a stakeholder or a subject matter expert to give feedback, to say, oh, well, in our environment it wouldn't really work that way, or we're not comfortable using that type of an example, or we're not comfortable with you using a timer. And these are things that they can give you feedback on before you've taken all of the time to build it. So this gives kind of a next level of detail for your stakeholders and SMEs to take a look at. And again, for each one of these, we're going to talk in more detail here in a second, but that's the high level. So you can see that a blueprint is great not only for self-documentation, all of these are great, but this is one too where if you're working on a team and maybe some people are going to be building the graphics, or hey, I'm going to build slides 10 through 20, can you do the first part of the course? This is a tool that starts to allow you to break up that work within a team. This is still great for sign off on scope, because what you can do is you can attach a blueprint to the bottom of a smart outline and take it one step further. So you can still have all of the advantages of a smart outline and then just attach a blueprint to it. It's great for sign off. And what really sets a blueprint apart from an outline is it's a great start to a plan about how long your course is actually going to be. This is a common mistake that designers and developers make, is we just kind of start throwing all of this stuff in. You know, it reminds me of when my husband builds a burrito. And I know you guys haven't seen this, so let me describe this to you. When we have taco night at home, we have all these different toppings, and he gets super enthusiastic, and by the time he puts them all on the burrito, that burrito doesn't close. And the same thing is true for e-learning designers and developers. By the time we start shoving in all of our good ideas and all of our content, usually the seat time is way too long. And so by forcing yourself to go through and think, what's in here and what's not? How am I going to approach it? Is it going to be active? That's going to take more time. Should I not have this part be active because it's not as important of an objective? You're thinking through all of that before you ever build anything. And it allows you to then come back and say, listen, I know you guys said that these messages were really important, and also that you didn't want to go more than 30 minutes, but based on what I'm seeing about the approach here, this is probably going to be a 45-minute course, and it's going out to the whole organization. So is that okay from an expenditure standpoint before I go and build this? And you can have that conversation because you have thought through your approach enough that you have a clear idea about how long it's going to take. Also still great for the content and structure of the course. and then also communicating the conceptual design of the course, including activities. Because now people are actually getting a sense for what you're going to have somebody do and complete in the course. The next one, and this is where we kind of move to PowerPoint, is a wireframe. So in a wireframe, you are, and I'll just kind of walk you through a little bit here. Over here, you have a description of the functionality of the page. So what is the learner going to experience start to finish in this activity? By the way, this is the same activity we just saw in the blueprint. This is an example of what it could look like in a wireframe. A wireframe is a visual storyboard, but it's where we're not getting super particular about picking out all the images and massaging the page. We're just kind of putting up some basic stuff, so boxes and lines and just a basic kind of mock-up. We are specifying what images we might want to use. Perhaps we're talking about navigation, we're doing scripting, but we have a little bit of a visual for somebody to use. And when we get to wireframes, I'll show you some more colorless examples of wireframes that are even simpler than this. So it's a really quick way to do visual storyboards or to do layouts without having to go fully into a storyboard. And you start to see over here we have a lot more advantages to going that far, because your client's getting your client or your internal stakeholder or your SME is getting a full script review. They're really catching the vision for what every slide's going to look like frame by frame. And for some projects, that's appropriate. If you're doing a high level of investment, if you have a lot of people that need to sign off, people definitely have a hard time catching the vision just from you describing something. So seeing something is really powerful for them. And then the biggest difference between wireframe and a serious or visual storyboard is just that we go one step further and we mock it up. So this here in this example, you're seeing a full, what is this slide going to look like? Oh, it's going to be kind of a little cutout of a business, and I get to go explore and listen in on these meetings and then give my opinion, and they can see all of that. And then down here, they can approve all of the scripting, all of the feedback, what's right and wrong, do I want it described that way? All of the functionality is here. So, I mean, truly the only difference between the wireframe and the serious storyboard is that we've gone to the extent of mocking up the screen. At eLearning Brothers Custom, we almost always do it this way, but that's because we're creating highly customized products for people who are paying serious money for them, and so we want to make sure that they're happy with what we're going to build before we go and build it. If you're working in an internal development team, you may not need to go this far, or you may only go this far for certain products that are more high visibility or externally facing or need to be approved by marketing. There's various reasons, but that's why we say adaptive. You know, use one or the other of these depending on your project, or maybe you're going to use two. Maybe you're going to do a blueprint and then you're going to go develop and show them the course, but the blueprint was far enough, you didn't have to go this far. So you can mix and match depending upon what you think is appropriate. So we're going to go in and talk about each one of these in more detail, and I'm going to show you some examples. I guess before I do, though, let me pause and see if anybody has, Andrew, do we have any high-level questions coming in right now before we jump into the details?
There's one question wanting to know if we can get an example of the Smart Outline document. That may be something that we can make available after the webinar. Another question here is, how would you add developer notes to a PowerPoint? And another question would be, where are there any templates for the items you're showing us?
Yeah, so I'm trying to go back to the first one. We're going to look at a more in-depth example of a Smart Outline right now, and I'm going to show all of the different sections. To answer the question about the storyboard, you add the developer notes off stage. And when we get to the storyboard section, I'm going to show you what that looks like and how we do it. But it's not on the stage. And so those storyboard reviews happen not in full presentation mode, but just in the preview mode so that people can see. We kind of go all around the stage, and I'll show examples of that. And then we do have a template of our storyboard, which would also work for a wireframe that's available in the free version of our library. It's still one of the assets that you can download there. And then I can make an example of the blueprint available.
Okay. A few more questions came in while you were entering those. How much time do you usually dedicate to these types of planning?
That's great. I'm going to expand upon your question because one of the common questions I get about this is, do I really have time to do this? Especially with blueprinting. Blueprinting is one of the most valuable practices that I ever picked up. And when I try to introduce it to people, they fight it because we're very tempted to just get in and start designing. And they also feel like I don't have time because so often people are pushing you, how fast can you get this done? How fast can you turn something around? But here's what I would say. Taking the time to do this, even if it's up to 30% of your project time, makes the rest of that time go faster, and you have less revisions and you have higher success. People feel very nervous taking that planning time up front where they're not building anything and nothing's getting produced, and it makes them very nervous. But I'll tell you from experience, once I've gotten to the blueprint portion of a project and it's all done, it is smooth sailing from there. I've captured all my thoughts. I know exactly what my activities are going to be. I have approval for them, so I don't have to hem and haw as I'm building, wondering how are people going to react to this? Is this okay? Is this accurate? No hemming and hawing. It's all approved, and all I have to do is pop my headphones in and just build. So that was always the easiest part of it. But it does make you a little nervous to not just jump right in and build and to do this, but I highly, highly recommend that you do it. Even if you just try to blueprint, which we'll talk more about in a minute on your next project, I think you'd be pleasantly surprised. I always have to convince people to do this, but then after they actually try it, they come and thank me. So try it out and then let me know how it goes.
There's a few more questions. I'm not sure how much time you want to give to questions at this time, Misty, but I'll ask this one. Is it more difficult for the client to review a storyboard in PowerPoint format because it doesn't have track changes mode? Word makes it easier to track client changes and comments.
Yeah, and I think that's why people use 3-column a lot. So there's two difficulties with the visual storyboard or doing something in PowerPoint. One, they have to explore all around the stage. So we actually have an instructions slide that we put into each of our storyboards that show them. And we've also learned over the years we need to do what we call a warm handoff with the client. So rather than just email a document out, we'll set up a 30-minute meeting with somebody and say, hey, let me just walk you through this at a high level. Let me orient you to what you're seeing. Let me show you what you should be looking for. And let me remind you what we really want your feedback on at this time. And by the time we spend a half an hour to get them oriented, that helps a ton. And then we ask them to document their feedback in a spreadsheet. So just a really simple spreadsheet where it's like slide 10, change this to this. And so it creates a work log of what needs to be done. It's kind of a nightmare when somebody inserts comments into a PowerPoint or tries to start editing in a PowerPoint. It takes us forever to do. So that's in our handoff. That's one of the things we say. Please resist the temptation to change anything in here. Please resist the temptation to leave comments and just leave it in the spreadsheet. There are some people who don't love the spreadsheet, but it is a very, very efficient way to collect feedback. And depending upon who your stakeholders are and how high level they are, you may want to, if I was internal to an organization and I had a very high level stakeholder, I would probably schedule a 1 or 2 hour meeting and literally go slide by slide through it and collect the feedback for them so that they don't have to type anything. But if it's a SME is probably going to want to sit down and really get into it for several hours, and they don't mind documenting it because they're very serious about the content. But high level or executive people, you might want to handle a little bit differently.
Okay. We'll take one more question at this time, and then we can take more questions later down the road. But this one, do clients approve blueprints but then object to the final product when the interactivity is added and really allows them to experience the design?
Yeah, that's a great question. Blueprints save our bacon, and we usually do a blueprint if we're doing a really creative course, so kind of like the Carnival thing, or we're going to do games, or we usually will go right to a storyboard if it's a pretty average type of a course. For the most part, we feel, whether we use a blueprint or whether we use a storyboard, that it does really help to communicate our intentions, and it helps to avoid large kind of design-changing feedback. So for example, I hate your Carnival. It surfaces that. What it may not surface is, oh, I didn't realize that people could just skip past this activity. I want it locked down, or some of those finer points sometimes, and sometimes we miss that. don't come until they're actually playing with it, or I don't like this font, or I don't like this color. But they're usually quicker, simpler things to fix at that point than, hey, I hate your Carnival, you shouldn't have done it this way. That's a total course redesign, and that's what we're trying to avoid through a blueprint or a storyboard.
Okay, awesome. We'll take more questions a little later.
Okay, and I'm going to go through each one of these, and we'll stop at the end of each one and allow you guys to ask some specific questions. So let's look at a specific example of a smart outline so you guys can get a better, I'm just going to pop out here and pull some of these up so you guys can just see what's included. So here's an example, and I'm going to go single screen here. Here's an example of kind of the what might be included in a smart outline. Now, let me see. You just got to be constantly thinking about adapting this, right? Because you might see this and be like, oh, this is way overkill for my organization. Great. Simplify it down to just a page or two. I used to use those. But if you're in a larger organization or you're working on a larger project, it's a 6-month project, or there's 10 courses in this package, or then this might need to be a little bit more robust to make sure everybody's on the same page. But as an example, some things that you can include are an overview of the initiative, who your stakeholders are, whether their approval or what you should be getting their input on and what they don't care about. You might have somebody from marketing in here that only needs to see the media. You can specify all of that here to avoid misunderstanding and to avoid somebody coming in at the last minute and saying, oh, well, nobody asked me. I hate your Carnival. So it's good for that. And then here you can define what is the business impact that we're looking to achieve. And again, this helps to keep you centered too. What are our training goals? Or you might call those performance objectives or learning objectives. You can put that there. How long is the course going to be? Especially if it's a blended program, you may have several different portions that you're developing, and you want people to understand the total investment from the organization of the seat time. And will there be variance between what you're developing? For example, if you're developing a 20-minute course, but it has a lot of hyperlinks to optional content, it could take 20 minutes, or it could take them an hour. There's a lot of workbooking, so you can specify all of that here. What are the actual deliverables that are coming from me to my stakeholder? What's the basic schedule of when they're going to see that or when they're going to be doing reviews? Hey, I'm going to want you to look at a first draft on January 20th and give your feedback. And this allows them to put that on their calendar. That's one of the hardest things, is getting their time once they've commissioned you to do something, to get their time for approvals. And so this allows you to call that out to them and to get a marker on their calendar. Will there be a pilot period? Again, depending on the size of the initiative, you may or may not need that. What's been mentioned to you about the target audience? What do you need to keep in mind as you're designing? You know, do they hate stuff that is touchy-feely? Are they more straightforward? Is it going to be going globally? Do you need to make sure to watch out for idioms? Is it much more heavily male than female? What do you need to be keeping in mind as you're designing? You've also got a spot here for visual and instructional design considerations. You'll have your stakeholders say things like, you know, we don't like this color, don't use it, or I'm very concerned about this type of message being sent in the course, and this is where you can capture all of that stuff to let them know that it's been heard. Technical specifications may or may not be necessary, but if they are, this is a great place to put them in. Your project resources. So this is everything you're going to use to create your content. Oh, Bob has this old training deck from 1998. We want you to take a look at that. And there's also some articles on the intranet, and there's also, so this is you saying, this is everywhere that I'm going to be collecting content from. Is this right? Because you don't want to hear a month from now, oh, Bob had a version of this. You should have included that. This is a great time to do that right here. What's the overall implementation plan for the organization? This is a great opportunity for you to call out to your stakeholder. There are some pieces of this that you're going to need to do. Just because I'm done with the training doesn't mean, so it's allowed you to be a little bit more holistic and to be a consultant with your stakeholder. Evaluation strategy, how are people going to be tested? Is it okay for them to test out? How many test items are there going to be? Sometimes people want a lot of test items and it takes up a lot of seat time. And then here's your outline. This outline can be done in whatever way you think is best. It could be more detailed, it could be less detailed, it could include some time estimates if you wanted to. And then at the very end of this, you could attach a blueprint, which we'll look at in a second. So that's an example of a fairly robust executive summary. In the old days, I used to do like 2 pages of this and just send it out to people or even talk people through it to make sure we were on the same page and include an outline. If you're working for the government, you may need something longer than this. And again, if you have a really long program, you may want something longer as well. So let me stop there now that I've shown you kind of a full example of what one of these looks like and ask if there are specific questions about the Smart Outline or Executive Summary.
We haven't had any questions about the Smart Outline or the Executive Summary.
Okay.
Well, here's one that just came in. Is that available at all for download or review?
Yeah, we can make it available.
Okay. We'll probably send that out in the follow-up email in a few hours.
Okay.
So be looking for that. And that's all we have on this subject.
Okay. Well, let me move on then to blueprinting. I indicated earlier that the concept of the blueprint is to talk about approach. And for anybody who attended the Elevating eLearning Design webinar, you may remember that we used this example of lasagna. So the difference between what we're doing as e-learning designers and someone who's just transferring content from one format to another, we use this example of lasagna. So technically this is lasagna, but because it's not assembled into an experience, it's pretty undesirable. The purpose of a blueprint is to really think through the experience that you're going to create. And as you're writing your blueprint, you're not saying, I'm going to do a drag and drop about this, or I'm going to do a mix and match, or I'm going to do a multiple choice question. You're talking about the experience that you want to create for the learner, and you're really painting the picture of what they're going to go through. So let me pop out. I'm going to show a couple. I'm going to show a main example for you, and then I'm going to show a couple alternatives. So let me show you this main example of a blueprint. We looked at this earlier, but I have several different examples in here. So here you'll notice, and I'll just work through this example really quick to help you understand the context of what we're looking at. This course is about meetings, successful meeting management, and this is an opener for the course where we have all these statistics about money wasted and time wasted and how it impacts organizations. And so in the content that we were given, there was just a list of like 10 statistics. And we thought, well, how could we cover that better? So here we're seeing, rather than covering statistics, the learner is going to be able to peek in on real situations that are occurring in a business between people who are holding meetings. Ineffective meeting practices will be shown. Then the user will be asked to speculate. How often do they think this happens? How much money is wasted annually? As they complete each active meeting area, the money wasted meter will go up until all areas are complete and the meter is full to the annual wasted amount, which is kind of the conclusion of all of those statistics. This is how much money is wasted annually. So as they explore around, they're given just kind of these little mini descriptions of what's happening in a meeting, and then they're asked what percentage of people confess to multitasking during meetings, and they kind of get to guess and then maybe be surprised whether they're right or wrong. We've captured what the key message or point of this is, and then because we're thinking through it, we've also maybe captured some potential narration. We've included a few visuals, and then down here at the bottom, there's a little spot to be resolved. There may be a question we want to ask, we may need some more information, we may need approval on something, and so we can kind of quickly capture that there. So this is a blueprint of a single activity or slide. Here's another one. One of the key messages in this course is people not understanding when to call a meeting versus use another communication method. So here we're saying this is called meet or not meet. This is our content linkage. So you know, before in our Smart Outline we said you might have 4 or 5 things you're synthesizing from. So maybe it's from a deck, you're going to include some best practices from a job aid, and this just helps you to keep track of what you've covered from your source content. But you'll also notice one of the key parts of a blueprint is that because we know how we're going to approach it, we also know how long it's going to take because we've thought it through. We know how many scenarios we're going to cover, how many times we're going to ask them to ask, what type of robust feedback they're going to get or not get, how long the message might be, what we want them to review. And because we've taken the time to think that through, now we have an estimate of how much seat time we might be using. So here we redefine the goal of this section, and then we talk about how we're going to approach it. You'll notice we're not talking about drag and drop. We're not talking about a multiple choice question. We're talking about what the learner is going to experience. And in doing that, we help to better articulate the vision of the course, but it also forces us to be thinking more creatively and to produce better design. You do not see this in a 3-column storyboard, ever. All you see is script. So again, there's a part for that over here. What is the key message that we should be reinforcing? Maybe some possible narration that we want to include, and a little visual that kind of helps to set the stage. So there's several more examples in here. This one is needing effectiveness, and it's all the same format. Sorry, we don't have time to cover it all, but I think that that helps to paint the picture. I also want to show...
There are a few questions on this. Okay. A good one that came in here, are there any general tips to differentiate when you should be using the full blueprint and storyboard or when you should use the abbreviated version? You showed the image of the matrix. How do you know which one to pick, when to use each type?
So the matrix is a helpful reference, but you're going to have to use some judgment. So I created the matrix to kind of help provide some guidelines, but on top of those guidelines, you'll also have to put in, well, I know my stakeholder is never going to take the time to review a whole PowerPoint. I just know it. And so then you're thinking, okay, well, how can I use these other formats, or how could I get them to review it? The other thing is some stakeholders, sorry, I've talked to myself just totally dry. Some stakeholders don't care about certain things. For example, some stakeholders only care about graphics. And the more you get to know your stakeholders, the more you can kind of pick and choose between these formats. Some stakeholders really don't care about what type of activities you're going to create. They just want to know exactly what's going to be said. They just want to see a script. In that case, you may want to use a 3-column. That may be one of the cases where you do, because they just want to see the script and approve it, and they're not necessarily going to give feedback on the activities. So the more you get to know the success metrics for your project, the personalities of who you're working with, what the goals of the project are, it will allow you to start picking and choosing between each one of these. You may use 1, you may use 2. Usually we wouldn't use more. In a max case scenario, we would use 3, but usually only 1 or 2 of these would we use in a given project.
Okay, and then one other question. You labeled the potential narration, but where do you place or write the actual narration?
The actual narration, so this is just a well thought out plan. And then from here, you could move into building the course, or you could move into a full storyboard. And in either one of those places is where you would do the final narration. But if you felt like you needed to get a total script approval, then instead of potential narration, maybe you modify this to say this is the actual script that I'll be using, and then you can use this tool as a script review tool as well.
Okay, great. We'll take more questions later.
Okay. So there's blueprints. Let me show you some other examples of blueprints, because there's tons of ways to do this, guys, especially if it's not client-facing. So we just looked at that example. This is a very similar example, so we don't need to cover that. This is an example of one that is done in a Word doc. It doesn't have a lot of visuals. It doesn't go into scripting, but it does talk about core concepts for how things will be covered. And this does not include, but should include, a time estimate. I can't emphasize enough how important that is. That is one of the most important parts of a blueprint, is, well, 2 things: approach and time, seat time. Don't end up with an overstuffed burrito. This is another example of a very simple one that's just done in an outline format. And then there's a couple visuals because they're reusing concepts from other courses that they're using to help paint the picture of what they're talking about. Those are all outward-facing documents. Here's an example of something you could just do for yourself. A lot of times we're given PowerPoint decks to work with, and so what you're seeing on the right here is the actual PowerPoint slide, And then off to the left, the designer has inserted this blue note for themselves where they're talking through how they're going to treat this slide. They're making notes to themselves because they've taken the time to think it through. They've maybe even inserted a couple little reminders to themselves of pictures that they're going to use. And you can see on these other slides, they have a little blue note on every slide where they've gone through and made a plan before they've started designing, which also allows them to even verbally talk somebody through it if they wanted to. It allows them to look at the seat time, and it allows them to make adjustments before they start developing if they started to over or underinvest in certain parts of the course that they shouldn't have. A couple just key points to call out again. You have to talk about the specific instructional method, and I emphasize that repeatedly because when people first start to blueprint, a lot of times they just create outlines because that's what they're used to. Or they'll say drag and drop, or no, you really have to think it through. That's the whole exercise, is thinking through specifically what you're going to do and to include a visual if you need it, and so that you can estimate that seat time. And then all of that is so that when you're done, you can look at the size of your burrito and realize, oh, I probably shouldn't have put so many olives or so much meat or whatever, but rather than the burrito being made, you know that in advance, and so you can kind of right-size your burrito. So you can go back and say, gosh, I'm just kind of using the same approach over and over again, or I forgot to even cover one of the objectives, and if once I go and cover that, my seat time is going to be 10 minutes too long. Okay, great. Well, which one of these is less important? Let's go simplify that activity. We haven't built it yet. So it's the thing, when we just build, we get so emotionally attached to what we've built because it feels like a child. And so deleting it just feels like the worst. But here it's just a plan, it's just an idea, so it's easier to load balance to make sure that you have the variety, that you've covered the objectives, and that you've done it in a way. There's times when I'll review blueprints that people have done and I'll say, hey, you've really described this activity and it's a great activity, but it doesn't actually reinforce your instructional objective. What if we tweaked it so that it was a little bit more like this, and that's going to make it more one-for-one for their real-life experience and for what the instructional objective was. And that works better, and that's the whole point of a blueprint. So let me pause on blueprint here. Are there any other questions about blueprint or what it's good for or how you might use it?
I'll give you guys a second or two to type your questions. I'll take this time to remind you that Misty has included a lot of this information in handouts that you can download through the GoToWebinar interface. There's the matrix and a checklist and some tip and trick visual stuff, so don't forget to grab that. You know, I'm not seeing any questions here, Misty.
Okay.
You're covering it great.
Well, let's move on to wireframing. Okay, so now we're jumping over to PowerPoint. And I want to show a couple additional versions of wireframing. So I said earlier I would show you kind of a non-color version. What you're seeing here is just some quick shapes. And so all of the content is here, all of the functionality is here, but we're not getting hyper concerned with color, with pictures, but it does paint a very basic idea of what's going to happen in the end course. Here's another example. I've widened this view a little bit so that you can see down below where we're covering the content that's going to pop up as people click on each part of this model. It shows that there's going to be an image of a person, but we haven't gone to the labor of picking that out yet. And so this is just a very, very quick way to convey what's going to be on the screen. So you might use a wireframe or something like this when you know that the client or stakeholder isn't going to be particularly interested in all the details of the imagery. We've also used this in cases where the timeline is very, very tight, and so it doesn't make sense to fully visually storyboard the course and then turn around and build the whole thing again. But we know that somebody needs a little bit more of a visual than what a blueprint will provide. I think wireframes are really great to use on internal teams where you have a lot of different previous slides even to pick from, or You guys are very cohesive about what an end product's going to look like, and so it's not necessary to go into all of the visual details, but you want to quickly mock up and communicate. Wireframes can also be a great way to break out work in teams because all of the thought's already been done, and now it just needs to be prettied up and made functional in the tool, and so it's very easy to clip out 15 slides and ship those over to Sean while someone else is building something else because everything's here. So this, even if this isn't something that you use with a stakeholder, it's something that you could use within a team to make a plan and then ship that work out to different people on the team. Any questions about wireframing?
I'll wait just a second. Everybody's choosing to listen instead of type, so we'll give them a second.
Well, and you can stop me, Andrew, if something comes in.
Sure.
I definitely want to make sure we have time to talk about storyboarding because this is the part that people don't do as much and probably what we have the most to say about. So serious or visual storyboarding is the main storyboarding tool that we use at eLearning Brothers Custom. But again, our context is we're building very serious professional courses that people are paying money for. And so we use that as a risk management tool and also as a communication tool. This is not appropriate to do for every type of internal project. But if you're a freelancer, I would highly recommend that you use this with your clients. And I think if you work internally to a training team, there are definitely use cases where you might want to go this far, or as you're starting on a new team or with a new type of a stakeholder to communicate your vision until you can get calibrated. So there's lots of different reasons that you might use it, but this is what it looks like. So as you can see, this is one step up from a wireframe. We still have all of these developer notes. So we're specifying exactly how the slide's going to function, but we've taken the time to mock it up. We spend enough time mocking up the slides that some of our clients actually think that they're the courses, and so sometimes we'll get people saying, hey, the buttons don't work, because they feel like it looks like the course, and that's awesome because that's the whole point of it. We want our clients to feel like they know what they're going to get once the course is done. And so what you're seeing here, this is about the pyramids, and as they click each one of these buttons, a little pop-up's going to come up. So this is where we're using the sides of the stage. Someone was asking a question about that earlier. This is the actual stage, and that's why we don't review it in presentation mode, because people would miss the notes, they'd miss the sides of the stage. What you can do is you can go into your master slides and you can set this up. This is just a function of the master slide where we've put developer notes, and then this is just a text block off to the side that people can modify. We often use the left side of the stage to show alternative images or pop-ups so that people know what to expect. So for example, when this button is clicked, this is the pop-up that's going to come up, and it's going to have another image with it. Sometimes we'll mock up all the pop-ups, or sometimes we'll just do one, and then down below in the notes we'll show the additional content that should surface when the other pop-ups come to life. Here's another example from a similar course. Here's an example of a knowledge check. Most of this stuff and so one of the handouts that I've given you is called the PowerPoint Tips and Tricks. It might seem a little overwhelming at first to create products like this because if you're an instructional designer, you may not be a graphic designer. And let me reassure you that the people on our team are also not graphic designers. And we're not using Photoshop, we're not using Illustrator. We use the native shape and image formatting tools within PowerPoint to create these. So when you see the courses built, they may look slightly different because you'll notice, for example, that our images still have watermarks on them. Because until the client says, yeah, I really like that, we don't go through the trouble of purchasing the image and modifying it. And so that's why it's still a little bit more rough here, but they're definitely having a good idea of what they're going to get. And so we can get feedback here about, you know what, I don't love orange for the buttons, and other things that would prevent us from having to change that in development. Here's an example of a scenario where two people are talking back and forth, and we have the entire script down here. We're taking the time to specify how things should be read. who's going to be speaking and what's going to happen and if they should pause and how they should sound. Another handout that I have for you is, oh, and I'm sorry, I don't think I really finished this thought. We have the PowerPoint tips and tricks for visual storyboarding document, and what that is I've just taken the time to list out tutorial articles for how to use some of the most common features in PowerPoint that we use to build out these screens and make them look like courses. Just some really simple stuff that's really helpful. And then what I'm talking about right now, and one of the most important parts of creating a full serious storyboard, is thinking through not only the script and not only the visuals and not only the approach, but also to fully specify out how a screen is going to function. There are a lot of things that designers don't fully think through until they go to build something. If you're in a case where you're designing and building a course, but if you're in a distributed team, like we are, where maybe someone is storyboarding and someone else is developing, you have to take the time to fully think through, is someone required to complete this activity? If they don't get it right the first time, what happens? If they're required to complete it in order to move on, but it's complicated and they can't figure out how to get it right, are they going to get a hint? These are all questions that you need to be asking yourself. So one of the other handouts that I have is the Storyboard Final Checklist. And this has a list of things that you can think through to really evaluate whether you have fully thought through the functionality of each of your pages. And it helps you to create very fully thought through, highly complete designs that can then be passed to someone else to build that are very, very clear. And that's the standard to which we develop inside our shop. So here's just a couple other examples, and it's just showing that visual mock-up on the screen of various activities. And I can show you, let me pop out of here really quick and I'll show you an actual example from PowerPoint. You know what, let me just pull this over really quick, and then for the sake of time I should probably just wrap with some questions. But this shows you how we have that off to the side. It also, let me see if we have, let me pull this one up really quick. This one should have the instruction screen that I talked about, where we have these call-outs and it tells people how to read the storyboard, what they should be looking for when they do a review. You could also build in a little mini executive summary to the top of your storyboard that includes some of your scope and parameters and different things you've agreed upon and who the approvers are. We'll sometimes include a technical information page, revision history, some quick stuff where people can quickly grab shapes and colors and buttons as they're storyboarding, images and color overlays or common icons you're going to use. You can set all of that stuff up for yourself so it makes it easier to just quickly cut and paste that over into your storyboard. And so again, the PowerPoint tips and tricks for visual storyboarding shows a lot of the common features that we use within PowerPoint to make that happen. And then the storyboard checklist is really helpful too, to just make sure you've thought through all the details of the notes. So those are the four main tools that I would recommend that you could mix and match and adapt for your needs, but they just really help you to fully think through what you're doing. That helps you to produce better results for yourself, and it also helps you to communicate and receive approval from your stakeholders in a way that'll really help you to be seen as a consultant and a value add to the business, rather than someone who's just roguely going off doing whatever, as I used to do. So I hope that they're helpful. And any last questions, Andrew?
Yeah, we've had a couple questions come in. Does the Blueprint Storyboard help with testing the draft published course? Do you have another template you use to get that feedback on the published draft course? On published draft courses, we use Review My eLearning typically with our folks, where they can just leave in-slide comments. So it's an online review tool. But you can still use a plain old spreadsheet. We've definitely done that too, where it's like, hey, on slide 12, change this to this. Has worked pretty well for us. But we also use Review My eLearning a lot for that. Okay. Another question is, can you provide some tips on receiving or annotating feedback from stakeholders or clients?
On noting it specifically,
Yes, annotating
Okay.
feedback.
Okay. I type about 140 words a minute for a reason. So that's one. We also will sometimes ask people if they're okay with being recorded so that we can go get their. Let me say this. Primarily, we ask people to document their own feedback, whether that's in the spreadsheet or review my e-learning. Sometimes we'll conduct a live meeting with them where we will capture their feedback into a spreadsheet, or we'll record it and transcribe it, or we'll capture it live. That's usually for people who just it's not going to work for them to do the spreadsheet, or they're more executive level. So those are the typical types of way that we would do that.
Okay, another one here. Once you've gone into such a huge amount of detail in the serious storyboard, how much additional time does it take you to build the actual training? Because you had mentioned that it helps you to streamline it, but would you say that it takes a lot of time still?
If you're working in an internal training department, I probably wouldn't go so far as to fully visually storyboard. I would go so far as to blueprint, and then jump into building. When you're a vendor like we are, we go so far as to storyboard for a reason, just to help prevent being off track with people. But it generally takes about twice as long to build a course as it does to storyboard it, to answer that question about time.
Okay, and then the last question that we'll take for today, because we're out of time, would you import your serious storyboard directly into Captivate or your authoring tool to save time?
You absolutely could. Absolutely. And if you were going to do that, I would take some time to specifically set up your master slides in a way that you know is going to import, and you can go back and forth and fine-tune that. But a lot of the rapid development tools will allow you to pull that in, and you absolutely can. We choose not to for our own reasons, but you absolutely can.
Okay, great. We are out of time. Do you have anything else that you'd want to share, Misty?
No, just I hope you try one of these in the right context, and I hope that it helps you, and I'd love to hear about it. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out.
I want you to know that Melanie said that you are her hero.
Oh, thank you, Melanie. Okay, Melanie, I want to hear from you when you use one of these. I want to know how it turns out.
Yep, contact us, reach out to us. In fact, Misty, do you have that slide that we can put up on the screen?
Sorry.
So, like I've said a few times, we're going to be sending you an email within the next few hours, and it'll include as many handouts as we can, and it'll also record a copy of this webinar for you to be able to watch again later. You can give us a call at the number on the screen, or send us an email. Missy would love to hear if you guys use these and hear about your experiences, and you can send that to the information on the screen, and it'll get to where it needs to go. Thank you so much, Missy. We've had phenomenally positive feedback here. A lot of people loving what you've got here. It was fantastic. So thank you. And give us a call, schedule a demo, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for attending.
Thanks.